Okay, great. Thanks very much for having me. I'm sorry, I'm not Jenny Earle. She's my boss. She's just flown back in from Australia today. But yeah, so I'm with the Prison Reform Trust, and we really exist to create or to reduce the number of people in prison, to make sure that the prison system is just and humane and effective. And what I like to see it like, we nip at the heels of government all the time. We ask questions in the House of Commons and in the House of Lords. We're there on those parliamentary committees, and we're holding government to account on what they say they're going to do, which, yeah, as Jane said, is slower than we would all like. Can you see if I'm standing there? So I'm with the Transforming Lives programme. That's specifically about reducing the number of women in prison. We know that there are twice as many women in prison now as there were 25 years ago. That's a shocking statistic. Most of them are in prison for very short sentences. They represent a tiny proportion of the prison population, and yet are among the most vulnerable of our prison population. If you want to know more about the Transforming Lives programme and all that we do, that's some of how we do it there. At the back I've brought some briefings. We produce local data sheets so you can see how Lancashire's doing. So I'm currently based in Merseyside. You're doing a lot better than we are on some of the statistics. But you can have a look at all of that. And if there are no briefings or fact sheets left, because I couldn't quite bring enough for everyone, just contact us and we can send them out. That's no problem. So we look at different topics, specifically women related. And some of the most recent ones we've done is we've looked at why the rates of recall among women are so high, partly because the Offender Rehabilitation Act 2014 meant that that was always inevitably going to happen. And we're challenging government on those things. And as well looking at the impact, not just on the woman herself, but on all those around her, because women are often connected to so many others in the community. And we want to try and reduce that impact. And we're really, our primary aim is to say the solution to women's offending is not in prison, it is in the community. It must be in the community. There are very, very few women who need to be in prison. That is not where the solutions lie. And that is the premise of the Transforming Lives programme, to look at robust but non-custodial options for women, to say let's support women in their communities, and way before it even gets to the stage of offending. So that's kind of what we're about. So what do we know about women? Well, in 2018, there were 6,465 prison sentences given to women in England and Wales. And if we break that down, 82% of them were for non-violent offences. I mean, that's an enormous amount for non-violent offences, and many of those were for non-compliance. So not paying council tax, not paying TV licences, things that really do not warrant prison sentences. But many, many women are on the harsh end of that kind of sentencing. So 82% for non-violent offences. Most of them, 77%, receive sentences under 12 months. We know that short-term sentences do absolutely nothing to reduce, to get to the root causes of offending and to reduce crime. We know it just encourages that this cycle, and people quickly spiral down. It's not the answer. And 77% of those under 12 months just causing more problems. There was a really interesting study by Lucy Baldwin a few years ago, Short But Not Sweet, about exactly that, the impact of short-term prison sentences on women and their families. And the impact is disastrous, basically, not good at all. So, yeah, short-term prison sentences lead to far more problems than they actually solve. 48% of women, their offending was linked to someone else's drug use. There's a lot of women in prison and in the criminal justice system because of the kind of relationships that they're in, often coercive, abusive relationships, and actually they're in prison because of someone else's drug use or offending behaviour. And that's something I think is important to bear in mind. 60% of those women had experienced some form of domestic violence. We're pretty sure that the statistic for that is actually much higher. And women are often, it's hard to disclose when that's going on, but that's a huge statistic. And again, when you take that all into account, and you see how very vulnerable our prison population of women is. And 53%, and again we think this will be much higher, have experienced, of those women sentenced, experienced emotional, physical or sexual abuse as a child. So an extremely vulnerable group of people. And there are high rates of anxiety and depression, 5 times higher than that among men. So we've got loads of statistics. We've got a briefing called Why Women, which really lays out why we need to focus specifically on women, and all of these statistics and more are represented in those briefings. But just a kind of snapshot to say we are looking at an incredibly vulnerable group of people for whom prison is not the answer, absolutely not. So what's been happening nationally? Well, just in the last 2 years, a lot actually has been happening in terms of briefings, policies, documents. Big question is, what does that actually mean? But let's look at some of those. So in 2018, the government published its female offender strategy plan and its accompanying whole systems approach for female offenders. This really lays out the case for taking a gender-specific approach to women. These were really helpful in saying we need to treat women differently. We often hear that, don't we? That, oh, we're doing that for women, why not for men? But actually, our own, and I'm just going to read this here so I get it right, our own equal treatment bench book for England and Wales says fair treatment does not mean treating everyone in the same way. It actually means being aware of the differential impact sentencing decisions have, particularly on mothers and on those with caring responsibilities. And I think that's really important, that we recognise women's lives are different from men in so many ways. They are, and we need to recognise that in how we support women and also in how we sentence women. So that sort of female offender strategy lays out the case for that, for saying women are different and we need to bear that in mind. We then published our report, What About Me?, which specifically looked at the impact of maternal imprisonment on children. That's an area that we've really overlooked, a group of children that are extremely vulnerable. They lose their primary carer when a mum goes to prison, and all sorts of impacts then follow. Our report is at the back there, but I can send you more copies of that. And I'm going to come back to that to dive a little bit deeper into those issues. But what we know is that there are over 17,000, and again it's likely to be higher, but over 17,000 children affected every year by maternal imprisonment. And the impact is far-ranging. It affects every area of their lives, from their health and their mental health to their schooling. Just every part of life is affected when your primary carer goes into the criminal justice system. In March last year, the Joint Committee on Human Rights published its inquiry, The Right to Family Life, Children Whose Mothers Are in Prison. This was really interesting, and the findings recommended that children's welfare should be more consistently and effectively factored into sentencing decisions. And that requires a change in law and practice. Basically, what this says is women must have an opportunity at some point in the sentencing process to disclose that they have children, and I'll come back to that because we found in our report, What About Me?, that is not happening consistently by any means at all. And crucially, custodial sentences should not be passed without a pre-sentence report, especially when a woman is a primary carer. Now again, it's not happening, but these reports, it's really helpful to have them saying it is happening. One of the things that, I don't know if any of you have read it, but one of the things that was really interesting when I read it was how children affected by maternal imprisonment are viewed in these kind of frameworks. And it came out as well in Farmer's Review, which was in June last year. And in both the Joint Committee on Human Rights Review and Lord Farmer's Review, children were viewed pretty much solely through the eyes of being future offenders themselves. Now that is something we have to absolutely shout out against. We cannot, that's horrific, and I'll come back to that as well, that we need to view children in and of their own right as people who need support and not view them as this sort of, we're stopping into generational offending. And I'll come back to unpack some of that. But just to say, so Lord Farmer's Review He called again as well for mandatory pre-sentence reports. So again, really useful to have that in his recommendations. He also is calling for what's called a personal circumstances file to travel with a woman through her criminal justice journey. That's a lot about the fact that what Lord Farmer's review uncovered was women are telling their stories again and again and again. They're being re-traumatized. We don't have good systems of passing on information with women at the center of that, knowing who knows what and why. And it's all, we need to look at that. And what Lord Farmer is calling for, and we're looking, and I'll come back to this, at trialling it in Merseyside, is this personal circumstances file. A bit like when a woman is having a baby, that health visitor file travels with her through her journey. So that's something I think is really, we need to look at how we pass on information and what that means. And how we do it sensitively, appropriately, and confidentially. Have a little glass of water. With all the shenanigans in Parliament, the domestic abuse bill was paused, but reintroduced last week, in fact. And this is absolutely crucial, given that we know so many women in the criminal justice system are themselves victims of domestic abuse. This is really key. And what we're doing is we are lobbying for all women whose offending is driven by their experience of domestic abuse to have access to free legal support, as an absolute minimum. And actually, I think I forgot to say earlier that one thing we do know about women in the criminal justice system is that many, many, many of them are victims of crimes far worse than the ones they are in the criminal justice system for. And I think that's something we need to bear in mind all the time. Many women are victims of worse crimes than the ones they themselves are being accused of committing. But this domestic abuse bill, I think, is really key because that is important that we recognise that a lot of women, their offending is linked to their experience of domestic abuse, and we need to make sure that those women are seen as victims in and of their own right and receive the legal support that they require. So we're hot on the heels of that right now. Now that's interesting, that's just kind of 2 years worth of some key reports. It has to be said, that's against a backdrop of constant change and confusion. We've had 5 justice ministers in as many years. It's not an easy climate, and you'll know that right now the current climate is to be tough and clamped down, so we're up against it. But I think what these reports should give us is a little bit of hope that it's on the agenda, and we certainly, and we'll partner with you in this, we are going to make sure these stay on the government's agenda. So you have committed to this. The government has said it wants to is going to adopt all of Lord Farmer's recommendations, and we will be holding them to account on that. But what we need is the how, the so what. You can have all the reports and they could look nice on shelves and be pinged around on social media, but unless it transfers into action and realistic and sustainable funding, we will be here in 5 years' time saying the same thing. And I think that's what PRT is very keen to continue to lobby on for those kind of things. What does this actually mean? Now is the time for action. We don't really need more reports, and we don't really need more recommendations. We know the stats. We've got the recommendations. We need to move it into action. But we're up against a changing climate, which will give us some challenges. So, what about the children then? I think children affected by maternal imprisonment are an area or a group that is often completely overlooked and therefore unsupported. So that's why we looked at this report, What About Me? And what we did was we spoke to 25 children and young people. It's a small group, but still a really important group, all who have or have had experience of a mum in prison. So we engaged with 25 children and young people and 65 women who are currently, 35 women, who are currently or had just recently been released from prison. And of the 25 women who are currently in prison, they had 65 children between them, and I think that's helpful just to hold that in mind as well. So what did they say? Well, they said it's really, really hard. They said having a mum in prison, it's like one of the hardest things. Interestingly, a lot of the children we spoke to for this report are part of a peer support group in Liverpool for children who have a parent in prison, and many of them Most of them, it's their dad. That fits statistically. But what these children, when we took them aside and just them, just the ones whose mums were in prison, they were able to say, it's harder for us. It's harder for us because what they said was, it's your mum who gives you a sense of who you are. It's your mum who kind of creates your identity. And the other big thing for children was, lots of people don't have dad around. Not very many kids don't have mum around. And so explaining that was really, really difficult for them. They found it excruciating. They didn't know what to say. And that was a huge element. And that sense of it, yeah, your mum's supposed to be there, was really interesting. So maternal imprisonment is particularly hard, and there is a study that says it has a harsher impact on children because when you lose your primary carer, it just creates so many other changes. Many of the children end up being looked after by grandparents. That may mean changing house, which may mean changing school, and so on and so on. And then there was this thing about feelings. You know, when a mum goes to prison, children said, we asked them how they felt. They said angry, scared. Some said I was actually a bit relieved as well, but I really missed her. And I felt these feelings all at the same time, and nobody asked me at all, you know. And then when children were asked, what was interesting was we found snapshot decisions were made based on that moment in time. So one young girl said, you know, actually, this was Caitlin. She said, I want to be allowed to be angry with my mum and miss her. And she'd said to her social worker, I hate her, I never want to see her. Because she felt like that at that time. And that, it was never revisited as a decision. That was it, ticked on a form, no contact. And she was, and the group I'm working with in Liverpool, we're working towards helping her have contact, but it's been so difficult. And all it requires is someone revisiting. So you felt like that last week, I think, with teenagers, that's constantly changing, isn't it? We need to revisit with them. How do you feel now? Has that changed? Would you like to relook at that and not make these once and for all snapshot decisions that that's it, you shouldn't have contact? And that was hugely devastating for children. They found that really difficult, and they kept saying, listen to us, but keep on asking us because we're changing our minds throughout this journey. And basically, our report says children's views, concerns and best interests, they were rarely considered. Right from the point of arrest, through not reflected in pre-sentence reports, right through to the actual prison sentence and even into release. They just weren't, nobody was asking, how's this impacting on the children? How can we best support them? So the report actually found, as we said, children are invisible, we're not asking, and if we are asking, we're certainly not asking in a way that women want to disclose that they have children. They were afraid. They said to us, I don't want to say I've got kids, they'll be taken away. Why would I say that? We need to look at how we're asking for this information, who's asking for it, and what are we doing with it? So are we saying to women, we can look at support for your children if you have children and if you want to share about that. It's about what we're doing with that information, how we're telling women about it. But of the 31 women that we spoke to, hardly any, I think 29 of them said, I don't remember ever being asked if I had children. Just didn't even come up. And they were afraid to bring it up themselves, so totally invisible. Lots of children having to keep things a secret, don't tell anyone. That huge sense of shame and stigma, which I think is particularly tough when it's mum. I think the media treats mums much more harshly, and that was really tough for the kids. That sense of disruption, it just affects every area of life. Only 5% of children stay in the family home. Most of them go on to being looked after by family members or in our care system. And we need to look at that. So it just affects everything's upside down. And grandparents, whilst they played a hugely important role, it was really, really tough for grandparents. We spoke to grandparents who said, you know, I was looking forward to my retirement, and now I'm doing the school run, and all my retirement travel money's gone, and I'm just really struggling. And there was very little support for grandparents as well. And school just being really difficult. Hard to concentrate at school, but also schools, I think, can be great communities of support and horrific places of bullying and stigma. And I think we need to look at that. How do we encourage our school systems to support children adequately? The sense of stigma, huge sense of shame, just that feeling of being judged by everybody, media stories being really harsh and unrepresentative, the children felt, of reality. And I think that's really hard. One thing was really interesting that came out of this was children who didn't live with mum prior to her sentence, but had regular contact. Mum goes into prison, contact stopped, with no explanation, despite the fact that the crime was not in any way increasing her risk as a mum. And it was felt by families that there may be a sort of inbuilt bias in some of our services that says, well, they're in prison, it's not suitable, you shouldn't see them. And that was a decision, again, made unilaterally with absolutely no communication. And that is really tough. So children found that really confusing. You know, why can I not see her anymore? What is it about my mum that's... And then they built up these images and pictures of their mums that were really hard for them to cope with. So I think we need to look at that. And all the barriers. Loads of the children said to us, actually, my mum didn't need prison. She needed help to get out of that relationship with her drug addiction. They themselves knew that actually it was the early help support that they needed. And lots of practical issues around that as well. So basically, that was the findings of our report. What we wanted to call for was accurate and sensitive data collection. We need to know how many children are affected, not so we can put flashing lights on them and stigmatise them further, but so that we can offer them support that they absolutely need. We need to implement what has been called for a long time, and the Council, the European Council, I can't remember the official title, but we're still under it even with Brexit, has recommended child impact assessments. So they would sit alongside the pre-sentence report, but focus entirely on the needs and support for children. So they'd be saying, actually, regardless of a sentencing decision, this child needs this support. And in some cases, they should be used in sentencing decision to weigh up, actually, is this the right way forward? Is there not a better community option here? Training for everyone engages with women and children. We need to understand the issues. We need to understand that women have huge vulnerabilities and complexities, and we need to be mindful of that. And bottom line is, we need to divert from custody. It needs to be an absolute last resort. Not that we're saying prison is a get out of jail free card, but that we need to look at what is the impact on a prison sentence on not just that woman, but on all that she has responsibilities for. And we need to look at, aren't there better non-custodial options? So what we're doing in Merseyside, what does all this mean regionally? Well, we're trying our best. Our stats aren't great. We're trying to learn from places like Greater Manchester, who are doing a really good job with their whole systems approach. But we're beginning to get things moving in Merseyside, which I think is helpful. One of the things we've done is we've started the Merseyside Women's Services Alliance. We've aligned it very closely within the PCC. And we did that so that we can then attract, so it's more robust, so that actions are held to account, and there's more of an option of us attracting some funding that way. And that seems to be working well. It's on the PCC's radar, and there's a system there of accountability already set up that we slot into. We have quite a wide-ranging membership. We've recently got DWP people coming along, which was really helpful, and some key housing providers. We have gaps, so our local authority, we're still working to make sure they're a consistent presence on that alliance. But I think that's really important. Right at the heart of it is our service user representation, and we try and make sure that's not just lip service and tokenist, but that our service users have an input and can hold us to account and say, actually, that's not right, that's not what we're doing. And we're looking at how to widen that at the moment, which I think is important. We've created an action plan, so we've looked at those reports that I put up, and we've made our action plan tie in with them. And so that's really helpful, so that it's all kind of aligned, if you like. And again, that holds us to account in that. And that action plan is regularly reviewed by the PCC's office. So they have it as well. There's a process, so someone from the PCC's office always attends our alliance and always feeds back. Where are we at to? Where are our gaps? What further support do we need? We started picking off particular issues. So in Merseyside, we had terrible recall statistics. So we did a workshop around that. What does that mean? And lots of it's around just getting people in the room together. But out of that, having an action plan. Well, what does that mean? The so what? That's important. And in a couple of weeks' time, we're doing the same around the impact on children, so that people in the sector have an understanding of what the issues are and how we can better work together to support women. We're looking at how we integrate our research and practice. So recently it came to light there were 9 women sentenced in Wirral Magistrates Court, none of whom received a pre-sentence report. None of the 9. One of them got a 3-week prison sentence for non-attendance of her child at school. Now we are taking that and doing a deep dive into, we've got researchers at Liverpool University and John Moores and the CRC's own research team, and we are going to interview all 9 women and look really deeply at what was the impact, what we're going to hopefully show is what could have come out had there been a pre-sentence report. Could those outcomes have been different? So we're looking at integrating research and practice together. We've made a commitment to pilot child impact assessment. So we need to make sure we fit in with national guidelines on that, so we're in contact with our national colleagues. But we think it's really important to make sure that alongside the pre-sentence report, we do a child impact assessment. I don't know why I'm beeping here. Who are the children affected? What do they need? And that's something we're looking at. And who's best placed to carry out that child impact assessment? I think we need to give women themselves far more empowerment to make those kinds of decisions, rather than saying, you know, that person's doing that to you or for you. Who do you have a good relationship with? That's a better starting point. And I think we're looking at that, and we're excited about that. We've engaged with all the children's safeguarding boards across Merseyside. We've produced a briefing for them. Here are the issues. This is what we'd like you to commit to as a safeguarding board, and they're then raising that in their own forums. We're engaging with educational leads, so we're doing some training with all the leads across education at the beginning of April. We've started a Wirral Children of Prisoners group. So we have in Merseyside, we have a peer support group for children with a parent in prison, and we want to emulate that over in the Wirral. And so that group will drive that forward, but also make sure that children affected by imprisonment, and particularly maternal imprisonment, stay on the radar of those who are making the decisions. We have now a women-only review court, which is going really well. That's really been a helpful process. We've engaged really positively with our lead judge for women on the circuit. She's come and seen on the ground what all the non-custodial options are, and that was eye-opening for her. I didn't even know that existed. And I think a lot of it we've realised is about relationships. Do those who are making the sentencing decision know what some of the options are, and how do we bridge that gap? And we've had agreement for court amendment to allow for pre-sentence report completion based on that Wirral situation of 9 women. We've now, in liaison with magistrates, that we've got agreement with that we will court will be adjourned so that pre-sentence reports can be completed. There was a bit of resistance to that. There was a bit of we can't do that for women if we're not doing it for men. So we've had to go back and say, actually, we know that women have particular circumstances, and so that's been an ongoing kind of interesting conversation. I think just to finish, I want to just quickly, for me, it's a lot about resilience and potential, because I think, you know, we can have all these stats and sort of look at how bleak the situation is, but it's how do we build up resilience in some of our most vulnerable children, and how do we see the potential in some of our most vulnerable women? And I just want to end with that. And I think in terms of resilience, one of the young women, she's 18 now, but her mum was in and out of prison all the way through her early childhood. She was looked after by her grandmother. And she said this to me, she said, you know, actually, whenever I feel or felt things were impossible, I just put that little apostrophe between the I and M, and I thought, I'm possible. And I remember her words and thinking, gosh, that's amazing that you can have all these hard, horrific experiences of your mum being out of prison, and you've got this, what is it? What's in that apostrophe? What is it that makes that difference? And again, through the What About Me report, we looked into that, and it's not a lot, and it doesn't cost a lot that makes the difference. What the children said to us, what makes the difference of it feeling impossible to being I'm possible is this: knowing I'm not alone, having other children who've been through a similar experience, that makes a massive difference. Having someone say to me, this is not your fault, and you are not alone, makes a huge difference. having special visits with mum, having visits that are not where I'm stuck in a chair, but having family visits and being able to spend that quality time with her really, really key. And having just at least one person, and it was often a teacher, but one person who was there for them and who believed in them, who got it, and who saw them as more than a child of a mother in prison, but saw them as a child full of possibility and potential. So that's, I think, really important in terms of building up resilience in children. With the mothers, what we did in Merseyside is, on the Alliance, we looked at what are the kind of perceptions we have of women in prison. And women said to us, you know, people see that there's no hope for me. They say to me, you know, you're not fit to be a mum because you've been in prison. They'll say, you know, you're only interested in drinks and drugs. So we took all these kind of perceptions that women felt they had heard, and we made this little video. And I just want to end with it because for me it sums it up. We have to see the potential in women to help them see the potential in themselves. I'm hoping this is going to play. Where do I point this? Oh, is that going to play? Okay, here we go.
I'm not fit to be a mum because I've done time in prison. You're wrong if you think my children need me. I know the kids are better off in care. It's not true I've got potential. I've ruined my life. Don't think that it could be different for me. That's what I want. Having somewhere decent to live, being a good mum, holding down a job, getting support. They're not important to me. Drink, drugs, harming myself is what matters. Listening to me, you should just give up on me. And don't ever believe I want to make something of my life. I'm beyond help. Don't assume that I can change. You see, I'm going to be in and out of prison. Don't dare to say there's still hope for me. If there was more trust between us, things could be different. It's over. Unless you reverse your thinking, totally turn around how you see me, and don't believe it's over. Things could be different if there was more trust between us. There's still hope for me. Don't dare to say I'm going to be in and out of prison. You see, I can change. Don't assume that I'm beyond help. I want to make something of my life. And don't ever believe you should just give up on me. Listening to me is what matters. Harming myself, drink, drugs, they're not important to me. Getting support, holding down a job, being a good mum, having somewhere decent to live, that's what I want. It could be different for me. Don't think that I've ruined my life. I've got potential. It's not true the kids are better off in care. I know my children need me. You're wrong if you think because I've done time in prison I'm not fit to be a mum.
That was really what the women in Merseyside wanted you to hear. Thank you very much.